The United States Navy was formed in October of 1775 when a small fleet of sailing ships were outfitted with bigger guns. And essentially their mission was to intercept ships bringing supplies to the British Army. This is where the story at the Hampton Roads Naval Museum begins. John Pentangelo is the director of the museum. Thanks for being with us, John.
Thanks, happy to be here.
What are some new and exciting things happening here at the museum?
Well, one of the exciting things that's happened, we've just renovated the gallery for the first time since we opened here in 1994. And what we did was the museum primarily showcases 244 years of naval history, so much of which happened in Hampton Roads. But what we decided to do is convert half the gallery to tell the Navy story in Vietnam.
And how did you go about, designing and establishing and setting up that particular area of the museum?
Well, what we did was, the very first thing we did is we had a conversation of what is this exhibit going to be about? And we are a Navy museum, and we realized that when most people think about the war in Vietnam, they think about protests at home, they think about the draft, they think about the Johnson administration, and when you think about the military, you tend to think about the Army and the Marines in the jungle. What people seldom think about is the Navy. So we thought this was a great opportunity. It's the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War, running from 2014 to 2025.
And out of all of the exhibits, what is unique, or is there anything unique in your collection that can only be seen here in Hampton Roads?
One of the things we have on exhibit is a Vietnamese sampan. It's a small flat-bottom boat. South Vietnam in the Mekong Delta is heavily populated by rivers, so they would be as commonly seen on the rivers as you would automobiles on the street today. This particular boat was captured in 1968 during an Operation Flank Speed, where 3 sampans were carrying small arms and ammunition. And the Navy brought whaleboats in to sort of get close, and once they figured out that these boats were carrying contraband, then they brought in river patrol boats. 2 of these sampans were destroyed, and one of them was brought back to the United States. And it sat in a Navy storage facility for 50 years before we put it on exhibit.
And is this one of the only sampans that is on view or on display?
That's a good question. It's certainly the only one that is here. I'm not aware of any anywhere else, but I could be mistaken.
And thousands of stories to accompany the exhibits that are here. How did you go about collecting the stories from some of these artifacts?
The Navy's really good about talking about ships, really good about talking about aircraft, big guns, things like that. Sometimes we forget about sailors. So what we wanted to really drill home to people is that these are human stories. The exhibit answers this very simple question with a very complicated answer. What did the Navy do in Vietnam? We tell the stories using artifacts, but good history is about people, right? So what we wanted to do was let veterans speak to the public themselves. So we went out into the field and we conducted over 40 oral history interviews with local Hampton Roads residents who served in the Navy during Vietnam. And what they do is they tell the visitor not only what they did, but also how they felt. Because when a visitor makes a personal connection with history, that will resonate and be much more meaningful.
During the Vietnam War, I was part of Lighter Reach. I carried on a YFU, which is a Yard Fleet Utility Craft, all manner of tanks, trucks, jeeps, personnel, food, anything to sustain war. When I first got there, I was scared. There's no doubt about it. You didn't know what to expect. But after the first few missions, you were young, I was 21 years old, I was bulletproof and made it through the first few firefights, so I didn't worry about it very much anymore. I just did my job. I was the senior engineer on board. What I worried about was keeping the engines running so we could move. You had to keep moving all the time. When you stopped, you were sitting target. But then, when I got my orders to leave in '69, and I knew when I was actually leaving the war zone, all of a sudden the missions became very scary again. Because you're worried about, my gosh, I've made it this long, maybe one of my last missions, I would not make it.